So nice to see you, Roslyn, as always. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I am Marcela Gomez, and I am a member of the TPRC Board of Directors. In my day job, I lead the research analytics team at the University of Pittsburgh, and it's a pleasure for me to do this conversation on spectrum policy. And this is exactly the kind of cross-disciplinary question that lies at the core of TPRC. Today's topic sits at the intersection of national security, technological innovation, and spectrum policy. I'm joined here by Roslyn Layton, who will present her forthcoming research on what she calls a commercial first spectrum policy for the US military. To see why this is timely, it helps to look at how spectrum policy has evolved. For much of the last century, spectrum was allocated through administrative processes. Government agencies decided who gets what and for what purposes. And this reflects an era when wireless was limited and networks were largely government owned or heavily regulated. Over time, policymakers recognized spectrum's economic value, and auctions and market mechanisms emerged to reveal the value and fuel the modern wireless economy. We may now be entering another phase. Commercial markets have become the primary drivers of innovation. The most advanced 5G and perhaps 6G, cloud, AI, and edge capabilities are developed for commercial use first, and then they are adapted for government and military missions. And the military increasingly wants access to that same ecosystem, since modern defense depends heavily on advanced networks, AI, autonomous systems, and real-time information. This isn't unique to the United States. Across the Nordic region, governments, military, and mobile operators are exploring how commercial 5G can support this mission-critical communications, even as adversaries also pursue their own strategies to merge commercial and military technology. These technologies do not respect borders. The same innovation available to allies is available to competitors, and no country keeps an advantage simply by preserving legacy arrangements. That raises a central question. If communication technology is increasingly driven by commercial innovation, should military spectrum policy evolve as well? Roslyn paper argues that the US should rethink a model built for a different era and moving from exclusive government-controlled spectrum and purpose-built system towards a more commercial and, as you call it, commercial-first approach that leverages commercial infrastructure while preserving military-grade security and resilience where they are truly needed. Today, we're going to explore the rationale, the opportunities, the challenges, and what this could mean for U.S. spectrum policy and military modernization. Roslyn, thank you so much for joining us.
So great to be here, Marcella. I'm thrilled that we can talk about this. And, you are deep in the spectrum study yourself. And it is part of the reason I'd love to have this conversation, because for anybody should come to TPRC, it's a multidisciplinary community. And spectrum is precisely that topic where you bring people together from engineering, from economics, from the telecom law, for example, from the social sciences, so the different areas, and being able to talk about these things. So it's absolutely the right topic. I'm glad we don't even have to wait till September. We can talk now.
Yes.
Our group has been meeting 54 years. TPRC started as a White House program, I believe, in the Nixon administration. Now it's the 54th year. So it's a tremendous legacy as a conference and an organization. But this has always been one of the key areas of TPRC policy, just spectrum in every way. And we've had long discussions, debates, if you will, about different uses of spectrum. And I think what's really significant is that for a long time, this has been so challenging for the different, let's say, the engineers and the economists, because so much of the spectrum is held by let's say, the federal agencies, particularly armed forces. Now, in most countries, most of the spectrum is also held by the government, but the real challenge in the United States is there's certain bands which are critical for 5G communications, which in all the other countries are harmonized to be optimized for 5G, but not in the US. So we've always had these little islands in the United States we've had to work around. And amazingly, technology and commerce has adapted But we're now getting to the place where the military itself is realizing that they're going to be behind if they don't adapt. And
Yeah.
what I'm hoping to do with the paper is to show this evolution and also to show where other countries they are advancing. You know, we talk about the Nordic nations. You know, China is another amazing example. We don't have really great real information. A lot of it we can't verify, but we expect that because they already are integrated spectrum equipment, apps, the military, it's already integrated. They're doing these things now. There's some reporting that that's going on. So the US really has to, you know, get its game together. And the other thing we see is that in a number of conflicts around the world, we see really asymmetric, what's called EMS, electromagnetic warfare,
Mhm.
and so in the spectrum, where let's say if you look at Ukraine and Russia, that Ukraine has been able to keep up to push back much of superpower over 4 years is because their superior use of spectrum. They bootstrap their drone technologies. We've also seen in Iran where you know, bootstrap drones have taken out major um, you know, military installations of radar for the US and allies. They've taken out data centers of American companies. So the ability to have the best communication services which are secure, whatever they are, and they're typically going to be 5G because that's our
Yeah.
prevailing standard. Whatever you make, you want to include with what you get from 5G, which is the speed, the flexibility, the integration, the security, the sensing, the video, the images, and so on. So
Right.
that's kind of what I'm suggesting is happening because now the sort of the other shoe has dropped. In the old days, you would hire a company, build me a network, soup to nuts. Here's the spectrum for you, build me a box, and so on. And now the military is saying, with it, well, it's been for a long time. We don't want to do it that way. Let's get the best of this, the best of that,
Yeah.
the best of, like, I want to get the best AI. So Pentagon just made a deal with you know, the leading frontier and open source
Yeah.
models for AI. So they're not asking, they don't go over to Google and say, please make us an AI. You know, they will say, let's use it all and then see what works for us. And so that's an important shift. Now, maybe I'm sure there's very amazing, smart people in the military who are already ahead on these things. But
Of
I
course.
think for us in the academic community, the way we frame our research questions, the way that we have modeled historically spectrum is going to work. We always have the US case because it's bifurcated. We have Department of Commerce doing
Hmm.
federal spectrum. We have FCC doing the commercial. That's not common in the rest of the world. So we've always had to adapt how we study it. And what I think now is the commerce is kind of driving this transformation in the policy itself, and that's also going to change how we study it.
Of course. Yeah. So I guess my first question is I completely agree with all of the benefits that you mentioned and the ability for us now to grab advances from many different areas and industries and leverage the best of each one of them uh, to create better like military services in this particular case. If this is how we think the best course or like the first best course of action is, why are we still operating under this century-old spectrum model?
Yeah. Well, you say that and I want to laugh because we're celebrating 250 years of USA, which
Yeah.
is fantastic. I'm thrilled. One thing predates that is the post office. People probably don't realize the post office was 1775. That's the foundation for communications and as a regime, as an institution. But our spectrum policies dating from the 1920s, 1927 Federal Radio Act. And
Mhm.
so, whereas we talked about our bifurcated world, our commercial spectrum policy has been amazing, right? Has
Yeah.
auctions, it's been recognized with a Nobel Prize, it has increased efficiency hundreds of times, it's very flexible. You can trade, you can sell your license, they get um, transferred in mergers and so on. So in our commercial spectrum world, which is maybe 20 to a third of all the spectrum, there's a lot of change. It evolves a lot. In the federal world, however, which is where most of the spectrum is, and where most of the, let's say, opportunities for efficiency. It's essentially been the same for about 100 years. Some changes with the administration, different MOUs and so on. So that in itself is staggering when you think about it. The time in the 20s, we didn't really understand how, of course, we knew broadcasting, radio was a big deal. Um, there was some value to do radar communications, the Navy and what have you, but there wasn't really the wireless economy that we know today. That took some time to get going. So there wasn't a sense of, um, let's put a price on it, or let's figure out how to make, the government handed out the licenses. Of course, there were some parties who organized on their own ad hoc and so on, but essentially in the 20s, the federal government came in and then decided how the spectrum would be allocated. And that whole approach has been essentially challenged by this last century of everything we know about a spectrum auction, where we use a market-based process to figure out what's the best use, or how do we price it? How do we pay for it, if you will?
Yeah.
And of course, the ITU, International Telecommunications Union, there is a meeting every 4 years where nations get together and say, let's harmonize which bands we do what, because we want to be able to use our phone when we go to another country, or
Exactly.
companies want to make different devices and they want to make it for a global market, and they need standards and so forth. Anyway, but the point is that for me, the other thing I want to demonstrate to policymakers is we've had 100 years of essentially no change on our federal policy. And that is really hard to accept, where everything else we have attempted to reform in the United States. It's changing in front of our eyes. AI is changing the landscape,
Yeah.
all of these things. And yet we're a stick in the mud when it comes to our federal spectrum. So, and even though we have the evidence of what happens in the commercial world. So that's another important point to consider, that, we also expect today our federal agencies have to be transparent and efficient, and they need to use the things wisely. I'm not saying that they're not and that they don't want to, but the sort of the impetus to do that, the requirements to do that, they're not really there. And so now there's, 100 years later, we have greater pressure because, just one statistic I want to give this audience: internet traffic, 1/4 of it is just advertising, and it's growing 20% year over year. If you look at the commercial wireless industry, their traffic went up 35% last year. It's incredible when you think about that number. That is an issue, not just for the networks itself, but the spectrum. We're running out, right? We went 4 years without spectrum authority at the FCC, without an auction. We're in the midst of an auction right now. It's exciting, this AWS-3. That's where we're unused, let's say underused frequencies are being auctioned up again. It's a wonderful recycling process. It's totally renewable. So that's an amazing thing. If you're an environmentalist, you should love that. We don't waste it. It gets put back into the system and repriced and reused. So so I think that process that goes on in the commercial side can certainly benefit on our federal bureaucratic side, that they can, be under the same, kinds of expectations. In other countries, this also happens. If you are the department of whatever, every few years you have to say, well, have you used your spectrum? But now we can do this more dynamically, right? I'm sure that you know about that. There's other ways we can bring systems so we know who's using what, how efficient is it, could it be used better? And so, again, this is the world we're in today.
Yeah. And so are all of these factors that you just mentioned, are this the reason, or is this the reason why commercial technology is increasingly leading military technology?
Such a good question. Well, I haven't set up that research question per se. I haven't measured that, but I could just say anecdotally, I think a lot of what's going on, there's a combination. I think our adversaries, I think there are maybe not adversaries, but perhaps competitors or other. It's amazing. Necessity is the mother of invention. So
Of
we
course.
see, if you look at Ukraine, they're teaching people how to use drones in warfare, right? If you follow let's say the military trade press, or the where the military, like we're the telecom nerds at TPRC, there's the military nerds where they talk about, oh my goodness, did you see what X, Y, and Z did? There are also many people who've left the armed forces who've become entrepreneurs, where
Hmm.
they have been in the battlefield, they have experienced things, and they said, we have to be smarter. We also have American entrepreneurs who are just, brilliant in their own mind, like this Palmer Luckey guy at Anduril, for example. He has a very clever idea. I mean, it's kind of a basic note. It's so obvious, but he's put it at scale where he said, we can't build a factory just to make military stuff. We need to use existing factories to make a car, and it's going to make a military tank, or it's going to, this is very similar to what the United States went through before World War One, when we had to build we had no airplanes, and World War One became a air theater, and there were no planes. The Wright brothers had just done their thing. So all of the car makers suddenly were making airplanes, and they retrofitted their car factories to make different things for the airplanes. That's not our story for today, but the point about, let's say, a company like Anduril, their idea is, we're not going to create a bespoke military fab or factory, if you will. We're going to use a mainline factory that does thing for industry in general, and of course we'll make stuff for the military too. Now granted, when we have something with Spectrum, it's going to have, a special slice or hardened use cases, extra security, better resilience, all extra little bells and whistles that can be done. But that
Yeah.
notion that we're not going to create like a separate infrastructure to do military production. And the same idea should work for Spectrum. We shouldn't have separate Spectrum for military uses. We should use our Spectrum as a whole program, and then we can provide a military slice on the best networks. So that's the kind of the kernel of
Sense. Mhm.
of what's driving that.
No, that totally makes sense. So going back to your work specifically, what does commercial first actually mean?
Well, it's not an academic term. It's something I've just appropriated, from and our business speak in the USA. It's very flexible. It's very plastic, inventing things. But what I'm trying to say there is that whatever the technology is, we want to start with the best in class first. Make it the best it can be. If it's the best search engine, it's the best plane, it's the best weapon, the best missile, whatever the case may be. And then we adapt it for the military. Now, what we're talking about is, let's say, our technologies, our spectrum technologies. Let's make the best spectrum policy, best commercial spectrum policy, maximize the revenue there,
Mhm.
and then we can adapt it for the military use or whatever the agency might be. So, um, what is the point of that? Well, the reason that why is it you want great spectrum policy and you want great networks? It is a competitive advantage in the world. Your
Yeah.
people, you want them to have the best spectrum that they can use for their work, for their work online, for their jobs, for their education, for their healthcare. That's one reason. In the United States, we have a disruptive technology called fixed wireless access, FWA. You can get your broadband through the air instead of in a wire through the ground. It's truly disruptive in that way. So that makes a lot of sense. The other reason is when you do spectrum auctions, you make money for the Treasury. You can use that money whether to improve connectivity for the disadvantaged, you can use it to retire debt, you can use it to even fund your military. And in
Yeah.
fact, we've done that in the US, other countries have done that. And it's very important. Many people don't realize that we, the people, as not American citizens, we own the spectrum. It's ours. And so we should expect a return for the uses, whether it's return through money deposited to the Treasury, it's a return on the security. We lend these frequencies to the Pentagon and to the Joint Chiefs and so on and say, please provide us security for these frequencies we're lending to you. So we as the American people, we're also saying, how do we get the best return? So how we use our resources, whatever that is an important performance measure for us, in our nation. And so when we talk about commercial first, that is the way to maximize the market value. But I would suggest to you, because the commercial use is so efficient, we can get better utilization across the board. Because
Mhm.
the discipline that we've learned through our spectrum auctions, have forced those users to do more with less. And that kind of idea can be replicated across all of the users of the spectrum, not just the commercial users.
And so my next question would be, does this imply, or would this be a military modernization strategy in terms of, like, like all of the areas related to spectrum or that rely on spectrum for the military?
Well, so there's a lot going underway in the world today. And I would certainly say this. I don't think the people at the Pentagon, they're not sitting on their laurels. They're quite aware of this. They're advancing of these things because our adversaries are, our especially if we had seen historically, I'm sorry for a little digression, Marcella, but where the United States has had these, what you might say, in essential victories, things that happened in World War II because they could command the air. In the first Iraq War in the 1990s with Scud missiles and so on, it has been the use of the spectrum that has provided military advantage. I'm not a military expert, but what I do know from this world is that whoever can control the air controls the world, the situation. And so that ability to do things, we've seen that, that's playing out in our world today in different conflict zones. So that, in order to do that, you need to have your Spectrum Act in order. You need to have those things in place. And so that thinking, that conceptualization itself is a kind of modernization, if you will. But the modernization that I'm talking about is everything that the military buys today, they want it to be 5G enabled. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but meaning what we're used to as consumers, we expect everywhere. So if you are, let's say you are a colonel in armed forces and you're at home using your smartphone doing so on, you would expect the same functionality when you're at your weapon system or your whatever dashboard or
At
whatever
least the
fighter
same.
jet. Right. Meaning that you're going to get, oh, I have a graphic user interface, or I have these location-based services, or I have this sensing capability, or I can integrate with this mapping, or whatever it is. We expect that seamlessness. And what we do through, as we experience with consumers, we're going to expect the same performance with other things. And then the suppliers of this are obviously going to come and say, please buy my new, X whatever widget because it has the new thing. So that is whatever it is. Our autonomous systems, the drones that are there, whatever AI is able to do to enable the edge computing, different cloud enabled applications for the battlefield. So that's a dynamic process. The military buyers want it and the suppliers want to offer it. And, they are cooperating in real time. I mean, so there was a recent example that we saw, there was a downed pilot in the Iran conflict who was rescued with a drone boat, right? I mean, isn't that an amazing innovation? You don't have to send out a person and a helicopter. You can send an unmanned boat, can get that soldier, bring him back. So those kind of things are game changers. And when you start to think about your conflict in that way, in a smart way, you're going to realize, well, I can't have my spectrum strategy from 100 years ago. I want to be using things in a smarter way. I want more 5G. I want to use all the operators. I want to go across countries. I want to do all this stuff. And that's what a commercial for a spectrum policy would let you do.
No, that's definitely fascinating. And I know you have experience in this area of the world. So can you tell us, what can we learn from the Nordic countries?
Yes. So, I have lived, I live in Denmark, and, the Nordic region is a very important region. This is where the GSM agreement emerged, where all
Exactly.
the, right, the GSM standards, another story for another day, but it's very exciting because there were different ways that how the processing of the information across the spectrum were done. It was GSM-1, it was competing against Qualcomm and CDMA and these sort of things. But that was an important thing at that time because the world is now on a GSM standard. That's where 5G comes from, how we plan out our roadmap to 6G and what have you. But interestingly, in the Nordic countries, you have Finland, Nokia, you have Ericsson, Sweden, you have used to make a lot of the phones, of
Hmm.
course, also make a lot of the network equipment still, but there's always been a tradition for understanding these kind of technologies. My university, where I've got my PhD in Aalborg, they've done the patents for the antennas on the phone. I mean, in the early days. But the point is, this region has Russia on the border.
Hmm.
And that invasion of Ukraine 4 years ago, it woke everybody up out of the stupor. And overnight, it has turned into, we're DEFCON 5, which is we're not, everything's fine. It's already the threat is has increased. So you go down from 5 to 1. So people now they are mentally preparing themselves for an invasion. What would you do? You can't wait to an invasion. You don't want an invasion, but you need to prepare as if there will be. So this is part of upping the game in terms of the spectrum, and meaning that we now have through the Nordic region, the whole Eastern, which is maybe the size of America's eastern seaboard, that we've been able to, so the militaries of these nations, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland, have been able to do exercises where they're using services across 5G, 3 operators, all the spectrum bands going across all of the areas. Now, that's not something we can do in the US. You couldn't say, can the Air Force or the Army go using from AT&T to Verizon, T-Mobile? They would not be able to do that. Different bands, different companies. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure if you tasked them to, they could. But here, because the spectrum's harmonized, and there's a cooperation has been existing for a long time, that can be done. That's extremely important advantage if you want to have defense, you want to deter an invasion, you want to, if you're in a war situation, you need to act. But I think in general, having militaries that are allied, that are working that way, that's very important. It's not just Nordic region, NATO overall, North Atlantic
Hmm.
Treaty Organization, 32 countries, they're also saying, look, we need to be able to access 5G networks. We want to buy our solutions that can work on that. So we need to know who our partners are. So they have to go to those operators and see, how's their equipment? Do they have equipment from untrusted vendors? Well, we can't use that network. We can't work in that country. That is a big deal. And that process is going through now because the countries of NATO, not just in paying more in their defense budget, have to up to 5%. They need to think about who are the operators? What kind of equipment are they using? Are they trustworthy? Can they deliver the NATO requirements? This is such a different world from I build my government military network and it stands alone. It's a
Yeah.
completely different paradigm. And this is the process that we're in now.
Yeah. Oh, that's speaking of interoperability. So I think you already mentioned quite a bit of this, but could you emphasize on how would the commercial first approach benefit the NATO interoperability?
Well, so I think when you look at what is commercial first, and
Yep.
as for me as a user, security is maybe my number one priority. That's more
Mm.
important to me than everything else. Is this a secure network? Can this deliver my mission critical capability? As a consumer, that's my most important reason. I am doing uh, my personal data is there. Maybe I have important research that needs to be encrypted or protected. Maybe I have some AI application integrated. So for me, security is my number one issue. And in
Hmm.
the past, we built these standalone networks precisely for security, but they become old and brittle if they're not updated. But now we want our commercial first policy to deliver us security. And we deliver security through the standards of the 3GPP process and 5G, which is defined. How do you design the network? How is the signal processed? What are the elements of how the data is stored and delivered and all of that transmitted and so on. So that kind of notion, when you talk about interoperability from the defense perspective, if I'm NATO and I have some kind of conflict and I have to go across a region, I need to make sure that every step in that path is going to be secure. If I'm working with vendor A, but they're using, an unsecure network, that chain is broken for me. I can't use it. I have to make sure that I am that my whole path will be secure. So in this respect, I think the commercial, one of the things you can say is, I want a clean network. I want to have vendors from the allied democratic world. I don't want to have vendors, from countries where, people are in slavery, or that, people are in prison making the parts of my network, right? There's, I can't, NATO, for example, has rules. It can't procure from communist countries. So that's very specific in their procurement. So as consumers, we can also have demands around security. We can have demands around the kinds of vendors. They need to be secure vendors. They have to have, they they need to have headquarters in democratic countries where we, as consumers, we have ability for judicial redress if we need it, right? I'm not suggesting that would be the reason, but that's a big deal. If you really think, if you take to heart what it means to be in a digital society, what kind of vendors are providing the service for you? Where is that equipment built? Under what circumstances? Under which laws are they governed? And what if you as a consumer have an issue? Where do you go? Are you going to be able to use a court of law? Can you get, representation? Do you have due process? Now, I'm leaning a little bit in here to our law people who are amazing at TPRC. They spend all day on that stuff. And I'm so glad. If you want to nerd out with the telecom lawyers, TPRC is the place for you. And we have a whole section on that. And they can, that has been going since the time immemorial. But all of those things are converging now. We've said that for a long time, but now they're converging in an international way because users, the governments, the militaries, we are working across borders, and our dynamics are there. And if we want to have coordination, it's not just coordination within the US, we have to coordinate with our allies. We have, I'm sure we're going to talk about WRC this fall. We had, you already had ITU people, if I'm not mistaken. We've had ITU last year. So it's really, I get so excited about it, as you can tell, and it's such a great community, because these are real issues, and it's not like everybody knows everything in advance. It's evolving.
Yeah, and there are so many different areas that touch upon these issues. So we can not only try to solve it or propose solutions from the engineering side or from the economic side. We need all of the pieces of the puzzle together to have a good informed idea of what's going on. So speaking, I know that like in research, we always get very excited about all of the great like benefits that we would get by our proposed ideas. But I'm sure that you have also explored, Roslyn, what would be the roadblocks that a commercial first policy model faces.
Yeah. Well, we often start with the roadblocks. I mean,
Yes.
I think that's very, that's a good research. Well, what are the factors that are impeding our progress? I mean, that's you know, and I would say that the issues here, they aren't technical, right? They're institutional, right? If you've been doing something for 100 years and you're that person doing it for 100 years, why would you want to change, right? It's working for you, right? That it's working for your agency. Dad, don't rock the boat. I have it, and so on. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of institutional resistance in certain, not in everywhere, but in certain ways, and also because there are costs to change. If we look at any kind of particular program, if we're having a fighter jet or a different radar system, there is a big stream of revenue of multi-billions of dollars and lots of jobs and lots of budget lines associated with that. And it's not a suggestion we're just going to rip that out, and this can't happen. But that idea to say, okay, well, we need a glide path. How can we transition that to a different way in the future? We need to look at something over 5 to 10 years of being smarter about it, or what are other areas that we can do things smarter and better? So the good news is the roadblocks are not technical. It's not engineering what's in the way. The engineering has been there for a long time. The barriers are they're institutional. They are, they're human, or you could say maybe in the sense the regulatory or the political. It's maybe more political barriers, right? That have to be overcome. But I think that as you move in the commercial first way, that the benefits start to exceed the costs, and now the drivers are coming out of the Pentagon itself. Those change agents are there. the money that can be, obtained to modernize. I mean, we have now defense industry, I mean, our defense department, Department of War, excuse me, $1 trillion budget. It's like many didn't think we'd ever, that's where we're at now.
Mhm.
So so that any one project that might have been huge in the past becomes such a smaller line item and becomes less not less it's becomes in the whole scheme of things, if your program's going to go in a different direction, then not in different your budget drives other things. So in the past, when your budget was smaller, any one project could have more power, if you will, or more pull.
Mhm.
Now, the military is moving to AI. It's already being driven by a lot of the commercial actors in the American marketplace. I mean, we have we'd have $1 trillion defense budget, but our private R&D in the US is $1 trillion. And that's a huge investment that
Yeah.
goes in our economy every year. And our military wants to take advantage of that, doesn't want to be on the sideshow, on a kind of sideline. They want to be able to take advantage of what commercial sector is doing. And I
Yeah.
think that we have a crop of companies and entrepreneurs who are ready for that. It's not a silo anymore. It doesn't mean that the military is their top customer or the only customer, but they're certainly an important one with special needs, and that they can be integrated and they can be served like, like everyone.
Yeah. So in along these lines as well, so how would we measure success, or what would success look like in this in the commercial first scenario?
Well, from a military side, success is always, I would say, first of all, deterrence. You want to have, there's a lot of ways to measure these things, but you want a safe nation, right? You want to protect people and property. At the end of the day, you need to be safe. You have to have, protect your country, your society, protect from attack, deter attack. That is going to always be the measure. But when we look at how do we use the spectrum, well, for one thing, I think a success measure is certainly to have more revenue into the treasury. I think that's a great measure. We can have more spectral efficiency. And I would go to you, Marcella. You know all about spectral efficiency. You can tell us what is a stepwise improvement. So I'm there. But I would also say that I think that for me, a lot of these things are qualitative, meaning, we can do our mission better. We can, for a lot of, it may vary within that particular mission that mission leader feels empowered, they feel ownership, they are driving, their results. They've done it in better or less or different than they had done before. So, I mean, it's easier to measure the benefits to our society. We measure things in terms of jobs. We measure things in terms of usage. We measure in terms of connections. We measure in terms of revenue. The military measurements they're different because they're measuring things around, we stay out of conflict. We deter
Mhm.
adversaries, right? What do we get for what we invest? Okay, so those are. I'm glad you're bringing up because I think maybe that's an area of the paper that I can improve on, and I'm not there yet. But so I'm I will work on that and bring that in September.
Oh, for sure. And I'm pretty sure that you will get a lot of engagement and hopefully great ideas for this on during the TPRC conference this September.
Yes, I think we already have I know that not the program is up, but the authors are already up online. We
Yeah.
have the panels are already up. There's some amazing panels. So, people can already see what's there. And I think, are we 24, 25 September? I can't recall. It's always a Friday and Saturday that I can look it up. It's always I think the third Friday and Saturday of September when we get together. And it's like a family reunion. I mean, it's like
It is.
fantastic. It is always, yeah. We're 25 and 26, sorry, 25 and 26 September. So my paper is not written yet. I have written lots of parts of it and outline, but I've got to do some more based upon what we talked about. But
No,
people
this
could definitely message me and so on. But thank you.
No, this is wonderful, and this is exactly what we like about TPRC, that we have our ideas, we have our papers, and then we engage in this I could say like academic family reunion, but like from a very multidisciplinary perspective. I started going to TPRC as a grad student, as a PhD student, and I always came back with ideas on how to. I mean, a lot of the feedback that I got from TPRC got into my PhD
Mhm.
dissertation.
Yes. Well, I mean, I met, my PhD advisor, Bill Lair from MIT. I met at TPRC. So, I mean, I couldn't have done anything in my career if I hadn't met TPRC. So it's, the people there, the feedback, the mentors. There's
Sure.
incredible mentors, right? The mentors who are there who are deep experts in the field, and, that kind of mentorship process which goes on, the new crop of students. We have student papers, right? People come in
Yeah,
we have a competition to write a student paper, and some of these papers are amazing,
they
right?
are good.
So many brilliant students across many, in the media fields, in all kind of people. They do papers on social media. They do papers on AI. They do papers on, we have so many new fields, satellite, things that we didn't have 10 years ago are now, and this, as what are the streams that we have today. So Spectrum, of course, has always been there. I'm sure it will always will be because we got a lot of work to do. But it is an exciting, and I would say, yes, we have academics, but we have people from industry, we have people from regulatory perspective, we have policymakers who come to our conference. So it's a very exciting community. And then our academics are many different fields. So we get nerds from all kind of domains, right? So and then different countries too. So it's
Yes.
really my favorite place to be at that third week of September.
Yeah, and it's the international component is also very important because as you said, as we talked about today, there are lessons that we can learn from different areas of the world, and also there are across the I mean around the globe, we are at different like states of like like commercial, economic, and military development.
Regulatory,
Regulatory,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yes. And that would be interesting to start to bring in. So I guess I would give my feedback is that we could have a military component. I mean, last year we had a Pentagon representative speak at one of the plenaries. That was fascinating. Was
Hmm.
really, and to me, I got the flavor of how much they have, how forward looking they are. I mean,
Yes.
we know, let's say in the 50s and 60s, American military was seeding what became DARPA and today's internet. So they've all, the NASA, the space program, NACA, which became NASA, they've always been there, but now our commerce has become so big that it exceeds what our government used to do in the scientific front. So
Yeah.
we're kind of like in this feedback loop time, right?
Hmm.
So where our commerce is feeding back to the armed forces, it's feeding back to the various space programs. And so we're in this, I guess, I don't know what you want to call it, a shuffle or a centrifuge or something like that, where we're now rebooting or re-energizing those traditional models. And for people who like policy, I think it's the best place to be because none of this happens without a kind of policy structure, right? If you have, what any business or any kind of a government project, you're going to have policy to make it work. And so this is one place, if you care about that stuff, you will be embraced, you'll be celebrated, you'll be welcome.
Yes,
And just as I have today, it's so kind of you to invite me here, and I'm enjoying the poolside and this conversation, and I hope we'll get some other people will give their perspective as well.
for sure. So, Roslyn, would you like to share your closing thoughts?
Yes, I would just say to sign up, go to tprc.com, I think, and you can register. It is,
tprcweb.com.
oh, thank you. Thank you. Couldn't
Yes.
remember. So please register for the event. And, I think you can also access the papers without, even if you can't go to the conference, you can still access the papers. So, but I would certainly suggest that you come because then you can participate. You can see the panels. I really think it's great for students. We're at American University in Northwest Washington, D.C. It's a beautiful campus, the law school. It's a gorgeous space, very welcoming. And it's an excellent conference. And I think all of you should sign up today.
Yeah, and we also have a graduate student consortium for
Okay,
grad students, which helps provide incredibly valuable ideas and feedback and to students who are working on all of these different areas of telecommunications and policy.
fantastic. And we would love anyone in the armed forces to join us too. Can definitely come and engage. I think they're welcome. I'm sure we'll find they can listen, they can participate,
Of
they can
course,
contribute. They're some of the most exciting discussions we've had.
yeah. People get very passionate, which is always encouraging to see.
It is,
It's a very engaged community.
for
And
sure.
with that, I want to thank you again, Roslyn, for your time. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and to discuss spectrum policy. I'm very looking forward to reading your paper and to seeing you in September. And we appreciate everyone who watches our conversation. And of course, if you have any questions or comments, ideas, don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.